Prologue. The storm raged through the forest, each crack of thunder like a warning, echoing through the dark, moonlit trees. The air was thick with tension, the wind howling as if it, too, sensed the approaching end. The sky was an unsettling shade of crimson, the blood moon rising slowly, its eerie light casting long shadows across the clearing where Kaelin Duskbane stood. His breath came in shallow gasps, his body tense with the strain of the ritual. Dark, flowing hair clung to his damp forehead, and his wolf, wild and restless, pounded against his chest, yearning for release. His once proud alpha strength was faltering, the curse weakening him by the second. Kaelin's eyes, glowing faintly with the remnants of his power, scanned the night around him. His hands trembled as he reached into the ancient pouch at his side, pulling out the sacred relics of his ancestors, the golden amulet, the obsidian dagger, the very same tools used by the ancestor who had made the first bargain with the moon goddess centuries ago. The same curse that now haunted Kaelin's every waking moment. His heart raced. The ritual had to work. Kaelin's voice, low and gravelly, broke the silence. By the moon's blood, I call upon the binding. I seek the release promised to my bloodline. The wind shifted, whipping around him, as though the very elements were answering his plea. His wolf growled inside him, agitated, feeling the power shift in the air, like a predator sensing prey. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows, soft, almost a whisper, yet it pierced through the storm. A voice from the past, a voice he knew all too well. Kaelin, son of the Duskbane, it is too late. The pact is eternal. Kaelin froze, his heart pounding louder than the storm. His breath caught in his throat as the ground beneath him trembled. The shadows around him seemed to warp, and for a moment he saw it, an image of an ancient, noble figure, draped in midnight robes, standing at the altar of the moon goddess. The ancestor who had made the fatal bargain, the one whose arrogance had bound them all to this fate. The figure's voice echoed once more, now tinged with regret. The curse can only be broken by the moonblood Heir. Kaelin's grip on the dagger tightened. The ritual was slipping from his grasp, the amulet beginning to glow faintly, its warmth pulsing in the palms of his hands. Moonblood Heir. The words rang through his mind. He knew what that meant. The one destined to undo the curse. The one who held the key to his salvation. But Kaelin didn't have time for prophecies or ancient whispers. His power was draining faster now, the ritual fading. He felt his strength flicker out, replaced by a growing weakness, as if the very essence of his being was being ripped away. His vision blurred. The blood moon shone too brightly now, searing his eyes with its unforgiving light. No, he wouldn't fall to this curse. He couldn't, not when there was so much at stake. With a desperate, guttural roar, he pressed the dagger to his chest, preparing for the final act of the ritual. But it was too late. The ground shook violently beneath him, and a searing pain shot through his chest, spreading like wildfire. He stumbled, his knees giving out beneath him, the weight of his own body too much to bear. His breath came in ragged gasps. He fell to the earth, eyes wide, staring at the sky, the blood moon hanging above him like a harbinger of doom. The curse had not been broken. It had only grown stronger. The voice of his ancestor returned, distant but clear. You cannot escape, Kaelin. The price has already been paid. The blood moon will claim you, as it claimed all before you. Kaelin's body trembled, the sharp claws of the wolf scraping at his skin. But there was no power left to release it. His heart thundered in his chest, but with each beat, his strength ebbed away further. And as the darkness closed in, he realized there was only one person who could save him now. One person, and she would be the one to decide his fate. The ritual had failed, but the prophecy remained. And somewhere in the depths of the storm, the Heir was out there, waiting. Kaelin's vision blurred one final time, his body collapsing against the cold, damp earth. His last thought before everything went black was of her. The moon-blood heir. Whoever she was, wherever she was, he had to find her. Chapter 1. The forest was alive with the scent of pine, damp earth, and the unmistakable fragrance of danger that lingered in the cool air. It was a place that Seraphina Vale had grown accustomed to, a sanctuary of sorts, though she would never call it home. The trees loomed tall, their branches stretching like fingers toward the heavens, as if reaching for something they could never touch. Seraphina's feet moved with a purpose, each step taken with the fluidity of a dancer, the power of a predator. Her body moved through the forest with effortless grace, her senses sharp, alert to every rustle of leaves, every snap of twigs. She was a rogue, outcast, hunted, and yet free in a way most wolves could never understand. Her dark hair whipped around her face as she dashed through the clearing, her long limbs slicing through the air with precision. The weight of the past hung over her, pressing down on her chest like a stone, but she refused to let it show. Her movements were strong, relentless, as she practiced the ancient combat forms her mother had taught her. But there was something different today, an unsettling tension in the air, a sense that the winds themselves were shifting, carrying with them a storm far beyond the weather. Seraphina's sharp eyes flicked toward the tree-line, a growl low in her throat. Her instinct screamed at her to stay alert, but the clearing felt too small, too exposed, as if the earth itself had betrayed her. The sky overhead darkened, and the trees seemed to close in around her, their shadows lengthening unnaturally. The very forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the first growl came, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through the ground beneath her. Her eyes narrowed. A rival pack. The howl echoed through the trees, sharp and menacing, followed by a flash of movement. The attackers were swift, moving like shadows, and Seraphina barely had time to react. The first wolf lunged at her, its claws aimed to tear through flesh, but she sidestepped with a speed that spoke of years of survival, of living on the edge. Her wolf surged to the forefront, but the battle wasn't a fair one. They were many, and she was only one. They encircled her, closing in like a pack of ravenous wolves, their teeth gleaming in the fading light. Seraphina's heart raced, but she remained calm, her eyes scanning for the best way out. She was outnumbered, but she was far from defenseless. With a fluid movement, she ducked under a swipe from one of her attackers, spinning on her heel to face another. She struck quickly, her fist connecting with the jaw of one, sending it sprawling to the ground. But before she could react further, another wolf collided with her, slamming her to the earth. Pain exploded in her side, and she gasped, the air knocked from her lungs. Her body rolled with the force of the hit, and she scrambled to regain her footing, but they were relentless. They circled her like wolves on the hunt, her breath coming in shallow, pained gasps. One of the wolves, taller, broader, stepped forward, a sinister glint in his eyes. "You've been running long enough, rogue. It's time you pay the price for your freedom." Seraphina's eyes flashed, the fire within her rising. But despite her fury, her body was beginning to betray her. The injuries were stacking up, scratches, bruises, blood pooling beneath her skin. She was losing the battle. A savage snarl escaped her lips, and she leapt into action, using the last of her strength to kick out at the wolf before her. He staggered back, but there were more, always more. She couldn't stay here. She had to get away. With a desperate, final effort, Seraphina summoned the remnants of her energy, pushing off the ground, and sprinted toward the edge of the clearing. Her legs burned as she ran, every step a struggle against the pain coursing through her body. She could hear the pack behind her, their footsteps growing louder, their snarls echoing through the trees. She was faster than they were, but not by much. The trees blurred around her as she raced through the forest, dodging branches that threatened to tear at her skin, feeling the sting of the cold air as it cut across her face. She could barely focus, her body was a battlefield, the injuries from the fight making it harder to push forward. She had to get to Blackreach. It was the only place she could think of where she might find refuge, where she could find protection, even if she had to beg for it. The sound of the pack's pursuit grew fainter, but not by much. They were relentless. Seraphina's breath came in ragged gasps as she reached the border of the forest, her vision blurring with exhaustion and blood loss. She stumbled, her body threatening to give in, but she pushed forward, her stronger than her aching muscles. The journey to Blackreach would take time, but time was something she didn't have. Every moment she spent in these woods brought her closer to death, or worse. Her heart pounded in her chest as she forced her body onward, her wolf urging her to give in to the fatigue, but she couldn't. Not yet. She had to survive. She had to find the answers that had eluded her for so long. But the path to Blackreach was treacherous, and as Seraphina ran, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Something far darker than the pack that hunted her. Something waiting for her at the end of her journey. And as the dark trees of the forest closed in around her, Seraphina couldn't help but wonder, had the call she felt deep within her soul led her here for a reason? She had no way of knowing, but the feeling, the pull, was undeniable. There was something waiting for her in Blackreach, something that could change everything. Seraphina's foot caught on a root hidden in the underbrush, sending her crashing to the ground. Her body, battered and broken, lay motionless on the cold earth. Through the haze of pain, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The wolves were closing in, but there was something else, a new presence, something powerful. Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. Was this the danger she had been running from, or something far worse? Chapter 2. The forest's darkness stretched around Seraphina like a suffocating cloak, pressing down on her with each step she took. Her legs were burning, her breath ragged, but she couldn't stop, not now, not when Blackreach was so close. The trees here were older, their trunks thicker and more twisted, as though they had been standing long before time itself had begun to measure its hours. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something far more elusive, something ancient. She stumbled once more, her body screaming for rest, but she pushed on, clawing through the underbrush, ignoring the pain shooting up from her side. Blackreach loomed ahead, a place that had once been nothing more than a whisper in the back of her mind, a name that seemed to hum with a strange, magnetic energy. It was a place of legend, rumored to be a haven for those who were lost, those who were broken, a sanctuary of sorts, though few had ever returned to speak of it. But it was her only hope, the only place where safety might still exist in this brutal world. The sound of the forest seemed to hush around her, as though the very land was holding its breath. And then, through the thickening mist, she saw it, a shadow against the dimming sky, standing just at the edge of the clearing. Caelan Duskbane. He was tall, imposing, his dark hair wild against the pale glow of the rising moon, his features sharp and regal. Yet there was something unsettling about him, something that made her skin crawl. His eyes were a pale, glowing silver, as though the moon itself had settled into his gaze. She felt the weight of his presence before she even saw him, and when their gazes met, something inside her shifted, deep within her chest. A pull, strange and undeniable, tugged at her very soul. Caelan didn't speak immediately. His eyes narrowed, studying her with a gaze so intense, it felt as though he was stripping away the very layers of her being. "You're a long way from home, rogue." His voice was low, rough, carrying an authority that made the ground beneath her feet feel unstable. Seraphina's jaw tightened. She had no energy left for games, no patience for his smug tone. Still, she didn't back down. Her own eyes, dark and defiant, met his, challenging him without a word. "I'm not here for your judgment," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from the strain. Caelan tilted his head, the faintest flicker of amusement crossing his features. No judgment, just curiosity. His eyes flicked down to her bloodied side, the way her breath came in ragged gasps. "You're in no condition to make demands, little wolf." The insult hung in the air between them, thick as smoke, but Seraphina didn't flinch. She had learned long ago to mask the pain, to push past the edges of fear and weakness that so often crippled others. "I didn't come here to ask for help," she said quietly, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. She couldn't deny the truth of it. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. Kaelin's gaze softened, if only for a moment, before it hardened once again. "Good," he murmured, "because I'm not offering help for free." She felt her pulse quicken. What was he getting at? "There's something about you, Seraphina Vale," Kaelin continued, stepping closer with a slow, deliberate pace. He was studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "You're more than just a rogue, aren't you? Your bloodline, it runs deeper than you realize." She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run, to escape the dangerous pull of his presence, but her legs were barely able to hold her weight. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Kaelin stopped before her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I need you, Seraphina." His words were blunt, carrying an authority that left little room for refusal. "I need your help." Seraphina felt her heart hammering in her chest, the raw edges of her vulnerability exposed to him. She clenched her fists at her sides, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "And what makes you think I'll help you? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied, his tone flat. "I know you're running from something you don't understand. And I know that your blood is tied to a curse older than time itself." She stared at him, disbelief and fear rising within her in equal measure. Her heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Kaelin's lips tightened, his gaze flicking briefly to the shadows surrounding them, as if expecting someone or something to emerge. "I've been searching for you, Seraphina, for the one who can break the curse that haunts me." Seraphina felt the air around her grow thick with tension. "What curse?" she whispered, dread crawling down her spine. Kaelin's eyes seemed to burn brighter, his power flaring just beneath the surface, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of agony in his gaze. "A curse that has bound me for centuries. A curse that can only be broken by the moonblood heir." She shook her head, taking another step back, her mind whirling. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not." "You are," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the forest like a blade. "You are the heir, Seraphina. Your bloodline is the key to unlocking this curse, to saving me." She opened her mouth to protest, to deny it, but the words died on her tongue. Something deep within her stirred, a sensation she couldn't explain, a truth she had never known but could feel now, thrumming beneath her skin. She couldn't bring herself to speak, to ask the question that lingered in the back of her mind. How could this be? Kaelin's gaze softened again, his voice growing quieter, more urgent. "Help me, Seraphina, and I will protect you, keep you safe from those who would use you. We both have things to lose and things to gain." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. His offer was tempting, but there was no trust between them, no understanding, just two lost souls caught in the web of fate. "I don't need your protection," she muttered, though the words felt empty. The truth was, she had nowhere else to turn. "And yet you'll accept it because you have no other choice," Kaelin said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "You're smart enough to know that." The silence stretched between them, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Seraphina's mind raced, but she couldn't deny the growing sense of inevitability. She was tied to him, somehow, in a way she couldn't yet understand. "I'll help you," she said, her voice low but firm. "But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this for me." Kaelin's smile deepened, as though he had known all along that this was how it would unfold. "Of course," he murmured, "but you'll soon realize that we're not so different, you and I." Seraphina's heart thudded in her chest, and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze any longer. She could feel it now, that strange connection between them, an invisible thread pulling at her very soul, urging her closer to him. As the darkness of night settled around them, Kaelin's eyes glowed with the intensity of his curse, casting a ghostly light across his features. Seraphina's pulse quickened, the pull between them growing stronger with every passing second. She couldn't explain it. She didn't want to acknowledge it. But something inside her, something deep and primal, wanted him. The connection was undeniable, and it terrified her more than anything else ever had. And then, in the stillness of the night, a voice whispered in her mind, a voice that carried with it an echo of her destiny. You cannot escape this bond. You are bound to him, Seraphina Vale. Seraphina's breath hitched. She spun around, but there was no one there. Only the sound of Kaelin's steady breathing, his presence looming large behind her. What was happening to her? As the moonlight bathed the clearing, Kaelin stepped closer, his eyes burning with the intensity of the curse that haunted him. Seraphina felt a strange pulse deep in her chest, an unspoken command that she couldn't resist. She fought it, tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't obey. Kaelin reached out, his hand brushing lightly against her arm, and the moment their skin touched, an overwhelming rush of power surged between them. Seraphina gasped, her entire body trembling as the connection between them deepened. And in that moment, she realized with horrifying clarity, she was already lost. Chapter 3. The nights in Blackreach were colder than Seraphina had expected. The air clung to her skin with an icy bite, her breath misting in the dark air. Her body still throbbed with the lingering ache of the fight she had barely survived. But as the moon hung high in the sky, she found herself strangely restless. The pull between herself and Kaelin had only grown stronger since their first encounter. She hadn't expected this, didn't want it, couldn't afford it. Yet there it was, an undeniable force that seemed to drag her deeper into this tangled web they were both caught in. Kaelin's presence haunted her thoughts even now, though she tried to dismiss it. She couldn't afford to get distracted by him, not when there was so much at stake. But the more she learned, the more she couldn't ignore the truth that seemed to linger in the air around him. The truth about the curse, his family's pact, and the prophecy. Everything was connected. And somewhere in the depths of her, Seraphina could feel it. Her destiny was wrapped up in Kaelin's, in a way that neither of them fully understood yet. As the sun began to set, she found herself walking towards the old library within Blackreach's walls. The place was a labyrinth of stone and ancient wood, filled with dusty tomes and forgotten secrets. Kaelin had been vague about his family's past, reluctant to speak of it, but she could feel it, the weight of centuries of history pressing against her as she stepped through the doors. The library smelled of old paper and mildew, the silence heavy and oppressive. Shelves towered above her, packed with leather-bound books, their spines faded with age. Her fingers brushed along the edges of the shelves, tracing the grooves in the wood, as though the library itself might whisper its secrets if she only listened closely enough. She walked deeper into the heart of the library, her eyes scanning the titles, names and stories that meant nothing to her, and yet everything all at once. Her fingers hesitated over one particular book, its cover dark and worn, like it had been touched by time itself. Pulling it from the shelf, she felt the weight of it in her hands, as though the book held more than just ink and paper within its pages. It was something older, something alive. As she flipped through the pages, the words seemed to blur together, the text almost impossible to read. But then a faint outline in the corner of a page caught her eye. There, hidden beneath layers of dust and age, was a journal, its pages fragile, its binding falling apart. The name written on the cover made her stomach twist with unease. Moonblood. Her breath hitched. The journal's presence here, tucked away in the shadows of the library, seemed too coincidental to ignore. As she opened it, the faintest traces of ink smeared beneath her fingers, revealing the words that had been lost to time. The writing was uneven, frantic, as if the author had been trying to outrun something they feared even more than death. The pages were filled with references to a pact made centuries ago, a pact with the moon goddess, one that had cursed Kaelin's bloodline, binding them to an eternal cycle of power and pain. And within these pages, the name Moonblood appeared again and again, each mention tied to the prophecy that foretold the rise of the heir, the one who would either break the curse or doom them all. Seraphina's fingers trembled as she read the words, her heart racing in her chest. Her connection to this curse, it wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was real. The bloodline of the Moonblood heir ran through her veins, and now, the full weight of that truth crushed her like an unforgiving stone. But there was more. As she turned the pages, the last entry in the journal caught her eye. The handwriting was shaky, as though written in haste, and the final words seemed to burn into her mind with a force she couldn't ignore. The heir's heart is bound to the alphas, but both are doomed to fall, unless the blood of the moon is spilled under the full moon's light. Seraphina froze. The words sent a shiver crawling down her spine. She closed the book with a snap, her thoughts spinning as she tried to make sense of the prophecy. Both are doomed to fall unless what? What was this curse, and what did it mean for her, for Kaelin? Seraphina. The deep voice shattered the silence, sending a jolt of panic through her. She looked up to find Kaelin standing in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. His gaze immediately landed on the journal in her hands, and she saw the shadow of recognition flicker across his face. "Did you find something?" he asked, his voice laced with something darker than mere curiosity. Seraphina hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. Nothing that changes anything. Kaelin stepped forward, his eyes narrowing, studying her. "You're lying. I can smell it on you." She set the journal down on the table between them, her fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "I found your curse, the pact, the prophecy." Kaelin's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "I didn't want you to find that, but I did." Her voice was low, but the words were sharp, carrying a weight that neither of them could ignore. "I'm the Moonblood heir, aren't I?" The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Kaelin didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the horizon, his back rigid. The tension in the room grew, thick as fog, and Seraphina could feel the pulse of their connection growing stronger. "I didn't ask for this," Kaelin finally muttered, his voice rough, tinged with something that sounded like regret. "This curse, this fate, but now that it's in your blood, we're bound by it, whether you like it or not." Seraphina stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. They were bound. No matter how much she wanted to deny it, to run from the terrifying reality that was unfolding between them, the truth was undeniable. Their fates were intertwined, and there was no escaping it. A loud crash echoed outside, the sound of shattering glass cutting through the stillness like a knife. Kaelin's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a sudden fury. Without a word, he rushed past her, heading toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice dark and commanding. "I'll handle this." But Seraphina wasn't about to be left behind. She followed him, her instincts screaming at her to be ready, to stand by his side, even if it was the last thing she should do. They emerged into the courtyard just in time to see the flicker of movement in the shadows. Figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice. A rival pack had found them. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat as the pack's assassins emerged from the trees, their forms shifting between man and wolf in a blur of vicious speed. "Kaelin!" Seraphina murmured, her voice strained. "We're outnumbered." Kaelin's eyes burned with an intensity that sent a shiver through her. "We don't need numbers," he said, his voice deadly calm. "We have the curse." And then, before Seraphina could react, Kaelin leapt forward, his form blurring as he shifted into his massive wolf form. The ground trembled beneath his weight, and the assassins hesitated for only a moment. Enough time for Kaelin to strike. The battle was brutal, feral, primal. Kaelin's movements were fluid and deadly, a force of nature in his wolf form, tearing through the assassins with a savagery that took Seraphina's breath away. But as the blood spilled, as the fight escalated, something in Kaelin snapped. His eyes glowed with the fierce, wild power of the curse, and Seraphina saw it, the loss of control. His movements became more erratic, more dangerous. He fought like an animal possessed, his claws slashing through the air with a blind fury. Seraphina ran to his side, her heart in her throat. She didn't know if she could stop him, if she could reach him before it was too late. But she couldn't stand by and watch him destroy everything in his path. "Kaelin!" she screamed, her voice raw. It was too late. The curse had taken hold of him completely. In the heat of battle, Seraphina felt a sharp pain. Her side was torn open by one of the assassins, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Kaelin's eyes snapped to her, and for a split second, the rage in his gaze faltered. The connection between them flared, a violent surge of power that threatened to consume them both. But Kaelin didn't stop. He pulled back just in time, stopping himself from delivering a fatal blow to the last of the assassins. His body trembled, his wolf form fading, but the rage remained, dark, burning, and wild. Seraphina's vision blurred, but she reached for him, her hand brushing against his arm. I'm not going to let you destroy everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. The battle was over, but the war was only just beginning. As Kaelin's eyes softened, the bloodlust still flickering in them, he took one final, shuddering breath. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and Seraphina knew, with a chilling certainty, that everything had changed. Everything. Chapter 4. The night was thick with the weight of the moon's gaze. It hung above them in the sky, a silver sentinel, cold and indifferent to the human frailty below. Seraphina stood in the clearing outside Blackreach, the air alive with the whispers of the forest. The wind had picked up, tossing her hair in soft waves that whispered along her skin like a lover's caress. But there was no comfort in it. Not tonight. Tonight, everything had changed. The bond between herself and Kaelin had grown too strong to ignore. She had felt at the moment his eyes locked onto hers earlier, that unspoken understanding between them, the one that went deeper than mere words, deeper than touch. It was a bond forged in pain, in fear, and in the strange pull of something ancient. She couldn't escape it, not now. She could still see the way Kaelin had looked at her, his expression unreadable, the faint flicker of hesitation in his eyes, like he was wrestling with a decision that had been made long before either of them had truly understood its implications. "Seraphina." His voice broke through her thoughts, a low rumble of sound that vibrated in the pit of her stomach. She turned to face him, her pulse quickening. The sight of him standing there, bathed in the pale glow of the moonlight, stirred something deep inside her, something she couldn't quite control. His features were sharp, the darkness of his eyes made even more intense by the light, his jaw set in quiet determination. "I've been thinking," he said, stepping closer, "about the bond." Her heart skipped a beat. She already knew what he was going to say, even before he spoke the words aloud. "You don't have to do this," Seraphina said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't need your protection." Kaelin's lips curled into a wry smile, but there was no humor in it. "You're wrong. We both need protection. This curse, this prophecy, it's bigger than either of us, Seraphina." "I know," she whispered, stepping forward into the cool night. "But I don't want to be bound to you. I'm not asking for a bond of love," he interrupted, his tone steady. "This will be political, a necessity for both of us to survive. I propose we seal our connection through the binding ceremony." Seraphina's heart tightened in her chest, and for a brief moment she considered refusing. She could walk away. She could find another way. But she also knew that she didn't have the luxury of choice. The rival pack, the curse, the prophecy, they were all forces far beyond her control. So, despite every instinct screaming at her to run, she nodded slowly. "You think this will work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaelin's eyes softened ever so slightly, though his exterior remained as cold as ever. "It's the only way." The clearing was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, as Seraphina and Kaelin stood before the altar. The ancient stones were covered in moss, their surfaces worn smooth by time. Above them, the moon shone in all its glory, full and brilliant, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like the fingers of a forgotten god. Kaelin's gaze never left Seraphina's as he stepped forward, his presence heavy, commanding. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, his voice low and steady. "This is a ceremonial bond, a pact sealed under the full moon. It will protect us both." Seraphina hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his touch was stark against the chill of the night, and when their skin met, a shiver ran down her spine. The air hummed with an energy that she could not explain, a powerful current that rippled between them, drawing them closer. She felt his heartbeat beneath her fingers, slow and steady, and her own pulse began to match his rhythm, as though their bodies were already beginning to synchronize. "We do this not for love, but for survival." Kaelin's voice was low, measured, yet there was a thread of vulnerability in it that she hadn't expected. "Our fates are tied. I can't escape it, and neither can you." Seraphina swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't want to feel this, didn't want to feel the way her heart responded to his words, the way the pull between them seemed to tighten, grow stronger with each passing second. She was torn between the desire for freedom and the inexplicable connection that seemed to have bound her to him from the very moment they met. Kaelin held her gaze, his eyes dark and intense. "I will protect you, Seraphina, but you must also protect me from myself." Her breath hitched, and for a moment it was as though the world around them faded away. The wind stilled. The trees whispered in a forgotten language. The moon's light bathed them in its cold, indifferent glow, casting them in a world that seemed to belong to no one but the ancient forces that controlled them. "I don't know what this means for us," Seraphina whispered, her voice trembling despite herself, "but I'll do what I must." Kaelin's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Then let us begin." The ritual was unlike anything Seraphina had ever experienced. The air around them seemed to thicken as Kaelin raised his hands, and a dark energy filled the space between them. The moonlight grew brighter, sharper, casting jagged shadows across their faces, illuminating the depth of their emotions, the rawness of their fears and desires. Kaelin spoke the words of the ceremony, each syllable heavy with power, each one a thread that tied them together. As he spoke, Seraphina felt it, a sudden wave of emotion, not her own but Kaelin's. The pain, the anger, the fear. It was so intense, so overwhelming, that she staggered slightly, her hand tightening on his. She saw images flashing before her eyes, visions of darkness, of a family torn apart, of a curse that had claimed his soul, slowly stripping him of everything he had once been. She gasped, stumbling backward. "Kaelin, what's happening?" The air crackled with energy as Kaelin's expression faltered for just a moment. He reached for her, pulling her close again. His grip was firm, but there was something tender about it, something that spoke of the vulnerability he so desperately tried to hide. "It's the bond," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the connection between us. I can't hold it back. You're feeling everything I've kept buried for so long." And Seraphina did. She felt the crushing weight of his isolation, the suffocating fear that gripped him with every waking moment. She felt the pull of the curse, its dark tendrils twisting around his heart, pulling him toward destruction. She felt his terror, his doubt, his longing for something he couldn't name. She felt him, all of him, in a way that shook her to her core. But it wasn't just Kaylin's emotions that surged through her. No, in that moment she felt her own. Her fears, her doubts, her desire for independence. The fear of being trapped, of losing herself in this bond that she had never asked for. The connection between them was undeniable, but that didn't mean she had to accept it. Kaylin's breath was ragged against her ear as he spoke, his voice raw. Seraphina, I don't know how long I can fight this. I don't know how long I can keep the curse at bay. But with you, with this bond, I might stand a chance. Her chest tightened as she looked up at him. His eyes were filled with something she had never seen before, something that had been buried beneath the hardness, the arrogance, the cold exterior. It was raw, it was vulnerable, and it was a side of Kaylin that she wasn't ready to face. I don't know if I can save you, Seraphina whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of her own emotions. I don't know if I can protect you. The silence between them stretched long and heavy, but before Kaylin could respond, a sudden, bone-chilling wind cut through the clearing. The trees groaned, and the shadows shifted unnaturally. Something was coming, something that neither of them was prepared for. Just as the air thickened with an ominous pressure, a distant scream echoed through the woods. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of growls, low, guttural, and unmistakably violent. The rival pack had returned, and this time they weren't just hunting Seraphina. They were hunting them both. Chapter 5. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of change. Seraphina felt it deep in her bones. The shift in the air, the weight of the moon pressing down upon her. The tension that had been building between her and Kaylin had reached a boiling point, and yet neither of them seemed able to tear themselves away from the inevitable. Something had changed, something they both couldn't deny. The clearing was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. She could hear Kaylin's footsteps as he approached, his movements heavy with a weight she couldn't yet name. His presence loomed behind her, a shadow that stretched long into the night. Seraphina had always known that the truth was elusive, that things were never quite what they seemed. But what Kaylin revealed to her tonight was something that struck at the very core of her existence, something so deep that it shook her to the core. Seraphina, Kaylin's voice cut through the stillness, low and gravely. There's something you need to know. She turned to face him, her heart thudding in her chest, the air around her crackling with anticipation. His eyes met hers, dark and intense, the familiar coldness in them now mingling with something darker, more desperate. The shadows clung to him like a second skin, and for a brief moment she almost couldn't bear the sight of him, so torn, so broken. And yet she couldn't look away. I've never been completely honest with you, he said, his voice tight with restraint. Not about everything. Not about what you are. The words hung in the air like an unsung melody, drifting between them with a weight that was almost too much to bear. What do you mean? Seraphina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her pulse quickened, her senses alert, every fiber of her being on edge. She knew this was it, the moment that would change everything. You're not just some lost soul. You're the Moonblood Heir, Kaylin said, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Your bloodline, Seraphina, holds the key to breaking my curse. Seraphina's heart stuttered in her chest. The words didn't make sense, not in the way she expected. Moonblood, Heir. The very idea seemed too impossible to wrap her mind around. I don't understand, she murmured, her breath coming in short gasps. How could that be possible? I'm nothing. Kaylin's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by something more primal, more urgent. You are everything. You always have been. She wanted to pull away, to run, to escape from the weight of it all, but her body refused to move. She couldn't tear herself away from him. She couldn't tear herself away from the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I know it's overwhelming, Kalen said, his voice rough. "But it's the truth. Your blood, your lineage, it's tied to the curse. The pact made long ago between my ancestors and the moon goddess. It was your bloodline that would one day hold the power to either break the curse or ensure its continuation." Seraphina could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. She could feel the shift in the world around her, the universe bending, molding, shaping her into something she never asked for. She was the key. But to what? To life? To death? To freedom, or to the very destruction of everything she'd fought to protect? "No," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with defiance. "I won't be a pawn in some curse. I won't be used." Kalen's eyes flared with a dangerous intensity. He reached out for her, his hand brushing against her arm. "This isn't about using you. It's about survival. You don't understand what's at stake. The curse is destroying me. I can feel it. Every day, a little bit more of my soul is slipping away. I need you. You have to help me." Seraphina's throat tightened. She had always fought for her independence, for her freedom. But now, with everything unraveling around her, she could no longer ignore the truth. She was tied to this curse. She was bound to Kalen in a way that went beyond the physical. She could feel it in her blood, in her soul. But that didn't mean she had to trust him. "I won't do this for you, Kalen," she spat, stepping back from him. "I'm not some tool for you to use to fix your problems. I have my own life to live, my own path to walk." Kalen didn't move. He just stood there, the weight of his desperation hanging heavy in the space between them. The tension was palpable, so thick that it seemed to suffocate the very air they breathed. "I know," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I didn't want to pull you into this, but you are the only one who can break the curse. I'm running out of time, Seraphina." Her heart raced. She wanted to turn away. She wanted to escape from it all. But the pull of the bond that had been growing between them since the moment they first met, was too strong, too powerful to resist. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension and unspoken words. Seraphina spent her time in the old library, poring over dusty tomes, searching for any clue, any scrap of information that might help her understand what was happening to her. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized how little she truly knew about herself, about her past, about her bloodline. And the more she learned, the more she hated the truth. She wasn't just connected to Kalen's curse. She was the answer to it, the only one who could either destroy him or set him free. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Kalen was relentless, pushing her to make a decision. Every time they spoke, the words were harder to swallow. Every time their hands brushed or their eyes met, the bond between them grew stronger, more undeniable. But Seraphina wasn't sure she could trust him. Could she trust him with her life? With her soul? The man who had been a stranger to her just days ago? The man who had now become her enemy, her ally, and perhaps something more. The tension in Blackreach was palpable. Lady Celeste's machinations were becoming more and more evident. She had begun whispering in the ears of Kalen's inner circle, planting seeds of doubt, turning the pack members against him. She was a master of manipulation, and she was playing a dangerous game. And then there was Verak, the ever-present shadow in the background, his alliance with Seraphina's enemies growing stronger by the day. Everywhere Seraphina turned, there were whispers of betrayal, of treachery, of people who had once been allies turning against her, against Kalen. The night of the blood moon was drawing near, and with it the final unraveling of everything. Seraphina had just returned from the library when she heard the commotion outside. The howl of wolves echoed through the night air, sharp and mournful. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet as she rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. Kalen was already there, his body tense, his eyes glowing with the intensity of the curse that had taken hold of him. He didn't need to say anything, he didn't have to. She could see it in his eyes. "Verak!" Kalen growled, his voice low, filled with barely contained fury. "He's made his move." Seraphina's blood ran cold. Varric's forces had come, and they weren't here for a peaceful negotiation. The sound of wolves approaching grew louder. The distant shriek of metal against metal, the clash of battle, sent a shockwave through her body. In the distance, she saw shadows, figures emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Varric's forces had arrived, and they were coming for her. Before Seraphina could react, something cold and sharp pierced her side, and the world went black. The last thing she heard was Kaelin's voice, desperate, pleading. No. Chapter 6. The darkness of the night was oppressive, thick and suffocating. Seraphina's world had been reduced to a blur of pain and fear, each breath coming in ragged gasps as she struggled against the ropes that bound her to the cold stone wall. Her side ached, the wound she'd sustained from Varric's forces still fresh and burning. She tried to move, to fight back, but the weight of her captivity pressed down on her like an iron cage. Her mind swirled with thoughts of Kaelin. Had he come for her? Did he even know what had happened? The last thing she remembered was the sharp pain of the blade sinking into her flesh and the desperate sound of Kaelin's voice as she collapsed into darkness. Had he lost control? Had the curse claimed him entirely? Seraphina's heart clenched at the thought. The curse, his curse, had been the source of all their pain, all their conflict. She had learned too much about it in too short a time. She had been drawn into this world, this tangled web of fate, and now, as she hung in the silence of her captivity, the realization hit her with full force. She was tied to Kaelin's curse in ways she still didn't fully understand. It was in her blood, in the very core of her being. She had always felt something different, something strange and inexplicable, but she had never imagined it would be this. This terrible weight, this bond that held her prisoner in a world that was slipping into chaos. The sounds of footsteps echoed through the stone halls, sharp and deliberate. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat as the heavy door creaked open and Kaelin stepped inside. His eyes were wild, filled with a fierce desperation that made her heart ache. He was here, but at what cost? His gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. The intensity in his eyes, the raw emotion that seemed to bleed from him, was enough to shatter her resolve. He had come for her. He always came for her. "Seraphina!" His voice broke as he spoke her name. Thick with emotion, the words laced with a mixture of anguish and relief. "You're alive." She nodded weakly, her throat too dry to speak, but her gaze never wavered from his. Kaelin moved toward her with a purpose, his body tense, each step calculated. He knelt before her, his hands trembling as he reached for the ropes binding her wrists. She could feel the heat of his skin even before he touched her, his presence both a comfort and a torment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't protect you. I should have." "Don't," Seraphina interrupted, the word barely escaping her lips. "Don't apologize. I'm here. You found me." But Kaelin didn't meet her gaze. His eyes were focused on the ropes, the way they dug into her skin, and the tightness of his jaw told her more than his words ever could. There was a darkness in him, something buried deep that she had yet to understand, something that seemed to stretch endlessly between them, drawing them together and tearing them apart. Finally, with a low growl of frustration, Kaelin yanked the ropes free, and Seraphina collapsed into his arms, her body weak from the ordeal, her breath shallow. He pulled her close, his hands trembling as he cupped her face. "I won't let anything happen to you again. I swear it." Seraphina closed her eyes at the warmth of his touch, the familiarity of it sinking deep into her chest. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But she couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at her, the fear that no matter how close they became, they were always teetering on the edge of something they couldn't control. "Kaelin!" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "The curse, it's still out there. It's still changing you." His face hardened, the vulnerability he had shown moments before disappearing in an instant. He pulled away from her, standing tall, his posture rigid. The coldness returned to his eyes. "I know," he growled, "but tonight everything changes." The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light spilling over the clearing, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around them. The blood moon. The night when everything would be decided. The ritual to break the curse would happen under this very moon. But Seraphina knew the stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't just Kaelin's life at risk, it was hers too. They stood in the center of the ancient stone circle, the ritual site where it all began. Kaelin's hand was warm in hers, his grip tight and unwavering. But Seraphina could feel the tension radiating from him, the internal struggle that had been building ever since the moment they had begun this journey together. "This is it," Kaelin whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "This is our only chance." Seraphina nodded, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what would happen once the ritual began, but one thing was certain. The choice she made tonight would change everything. The ritual required more than just a simple act of magic. It demanded a selfless act of true love. But for Seraphina, the idea of love, of truly letting go, of surrendering herself completely, was terrifying. The walls she had built around herself, the armor she had worn for so long, seemed to crumble at the thought of giving in to Kaelin's touch, his influence. And yet here she was, standing before him, with the fate of them both hanging in the balance. "I'm scared," she confessed softly, her voice trembling in the silence of the night. Kaelin turned to her, his face softening. "I know you are, but you don't have to do this alone. We face it together. We always have." But Seraphina wasn't so sure. How could she trust him? How could she trust that the bond they shared wasn't just another trap? Another lie? Was it love, or was it something darker? As the first words of the ritual began to echo in the night, the ground beneath them trembled. Kaelin's grip tightened on her hand, and she felt the surge of power rising between them, a bond forged not just by their blood, but by the curse that had haunted him for so long. The ritual was in motion. They couldn't stop now, but before they could complete the first incantation, a violent howl shattered the silence of the night. Seraphina's heart skipped a beat as the familiar scent of danger flooded her senses. "Varek!" Kaelin muttered under his breath. Before they could react, the air around them seemed to twist. Shadows poured from the forest, converging on them with the speed of a storm. A dozen of Varek's loyal followers emerged from the darkness, weapons drawn, eyes gleaming with malice. "You really thought you could break the curse, Kaelin?" Varek's voice rang out, mocking and cold. "You're nothing but a pawn, just like your ancestors. And now I will take what's mine." Kaelin's eyes flashed with fury as he stepped between Seraphina and the attackers. This ends tonight. But Seraphina knew better. She had seen the darkness in Kaelin before, but what she saw in his eyes now was something far more dangerous. His rage was building, threatening to consume him, to pull him into the very madness that had haunted his bloodline for generations. The battle erupted in a blur of movement. Kaelin was a blur of motion, his strength unmatched as he tore through Varek's forces, his fury uncontrolled. But Seraphina could see the toll it was taking on him. The curse that still gnawed at his soul was threatening to take hold. And then, amidst the chaos, she saw him. Varek, the man who had torn her world apart, who had manipulated everyone around him. The man who had set this all in motion. He was coming for her. In that moment, she knew that the ritual would not be completed unless they fought together. The curse, the bond, it was more than just magic. It was their connection. Their souls were tied, and the only way to survive was to face it together. As Varek reached for her, the power of the curse surged between her and Kaelin. The blood moon shone down, casting its light over the battlefield. The ritual was incomplete, the bond still unsealed. And Seraphina knew, with a cold certainty, that she had to choose. Would she sacrifice herself to save him, or would she destroy him to save herself? The choice was hers, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest like 1,000 knives. Chapter 7. The moon hung in the sky like a silent sentinel, casting its silvery glow across the battlefield. The air, thick with smoke and the heavy scent of blood, seemed to pulse with the residual energy of the curse that had torn apart Kaelin's life for so long. His body was battered, bloodied, his movements slower than they had been before the battle began. The curse had been broken. But at what cost? Kaelin stood tall, though every fiber of his being screamed for rest. The pain in his chest, the deep ache of exhaustion, was unbearable. But he didn't allow himself to falter, not in front of his pack, not in front of Seraphina. His eyes found her in the chaos, and everything else seemed to fade away. Seraphina. She was standing across the clearing, her eyes wide with uncertainty, her expression a mixture of fear and something softer, something like hope. Her gaze locked with his, and for a moment the world stopped moving. He had done it. The curse was broken, but in its place a deep, gnawing emptiness lingered inside him. His powers, the strength that had once defined him as Alpha, were dimmer now, like a flame that had been doused in water. The battle had taken everything. His strength, his dominance, his place as Alpha. And yet, in the silence that followed, there was no greater victory than knowing that Seraphina was still here, alive, unbroken. He had given everything to save her, and in that moment he would give everything again if it meant she would stay by his side. But would she? Kaelin felt it, the doubt, the ache deep inside him as he realized that the bond between them, the connection that had once seemed like a curse, had shifted. They were no longer bound by the weight of the curse alone. Something deeper had taken root, something raw, something that felt like love, but also like fear that it might all slip away. Seraphina's footsteps echoed through the silence as she approached him, her expression guarded. She had always been strong, but in her eyes now he could see the struggle. The same fear that gnawed at him was evident in her. "Kaelin!" she whispered, her voice trembling with something he couldn't quite place. "You've done it. The curse is broken." "Yes," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, but not without a cost. He could feel her hesitation, the distance that had always been between them, growing ever so slightly. The curse had kept them together, had tied them in ways they couldn't escape. But now, with it broken, there was nothing holding them together but the fragile thread of their shared experience, their shared pain. "Your powers," she murmured, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for something hidden beneath his wounds. "They're fading." "They were never mine to keep," Kaelin admitted, his voice bitter. "I was never meant to be Alpha this way. The curse was never just about power, Seraphina. It was about control, about survival." She didn't speak for a moment, her eyes softening as she stepped closer to him. "But you don't have to lose yourself in that. You don't have to be the man you were before. You've already shown me that." The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had never seen himself as anything other than a warrior, a leader. But now, with the curse broken, the future was uncertain. He could feel the pack's eyes on him, the uncertainty, the doubt that rippled through them. The very foundation of his reign had been shattered, and though they stood victorious, the cost was too great to ignore. Kaelin's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the faintest hint of dawn was creeping along the edges of the sky. The light of the moon was slowly fading, its dominance in the heavens being replaced by the warmth of the coming day. The moon had always been his guiding light, the source of his power, but now it felt as if he had lost something even more vital than his strength. "What happens now?" Seraphina asked, her voice so quiet, so fragile, as if she feared the answer. Kaelin turned back to her, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "I thought I knew. I thought breaking the curse would fix everything. But it didn't. I'm still me, and I'm not sure if that's enough anymore." Seraphina stepped closer, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against his. The contact was like a spark in the cold night, igniting something within him. Her touch, her presence, had always been his anchor, the one thing that kept him from slipping into the darkness. But now, in the wake of the curse's destruction, he wasn't sure if he deserved her. "You are enough, Kaelin," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You always have been." He shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't know if I can lead anymore. I don't know if I'm the man they need." Seraphina reached up, her fingers gently tilting his chin until their eyes met. "You don't have to be the man you were, Kaelin. The pack doesn't need an alpha who holds everything together with fear and control. They need a leader who understands what it means to sacrifice, who understands that power isn't the answer." Her words were like a balm to his soul, soothing the rawness of his fear, his uncertainty. And yet, as he gazed into her eyes, the question still lingered. What about her? What about them? "You've changed me, Seraphina," Kaelin murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me a world beyond what I was. But I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. Not now." Her gaze softened, and her lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for you, whatever that looks like." There was no more doubt in her voice, no more hesitation. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to walk away from him now. She was here, standing before him, her heart open and vulnerable in a way that he had never seen before. But what about him? What about the man who had spent so long fighting for control, for power, for a future that seemed doomed from the start? The silence between them stretched, and Kaelin felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the pack anymore. It wasn't just about the curse. It was about him, about her, and the future they could create together. "I can't promise that I have all the answers," Kaelin said, his voice raw with emotion. "But I can promise that I will always fight for us. For you." Seraphina's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Kaelin felt a sense of peace settle over him. Maybe he didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe the only thing that mattered was the journey they would walk together. The battle with Varek and Celeste had left them broken, but also whole in a way they had never imagined. The pack was safe, their future uncertain but full of possibility. And as the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting its golden light across the land, Kaelin and Seraphina stood together, their bond stronger than ever before. The future was theirs to shape, and no curse, no force could tear them apart. But just as Kaelin reached out to pull her close, a familiar howl split the air. Varek's voice echoed through the clearing, but this time it was different. This time there was no fear in it. The true test had just begun. The howl rang out again, louder this time, and Kaelin's heart sank. The battle wasn't over. Varek was still out there, and his forces were far from defeated. The fight for the future of the pack for Kaelin and Seraphina was far from over. But this time they would face it together.